Today we'll be discussing on microbial pathogenesis and diseases. So microorganisms include all forms of bacteria, viruses, protozoa, and some forms of fungi and algae. They are normally harmless and even helpful, but under certain conditions, some organisms may cause disease. So disease-causing microorganisms are termed as pathogens, and their ability to cause the disease is called pathogenicity. Microbial strain that can cause a disease are called the virulent strain, while that cannot are termed as the avirulent strain. All virulent organisms possess one or more special properties that contribute to their ability to cause the disease. In some organisms, pathogenicity is largely due to their toxigenicity. Here, toxigenicity is the ability of the organism to produce a compound which are either protein or lipopolysaccharide known as toxins, which produce specific harmful effects on the host. So first we'll see host-pathogen interaction. An infection occurs when a pathogen enters or begins to grow on a host. It sometimes occurs in the absence of a disease, which is termed as silent infection, but it produces inflammation and other symptoms of the disease. Any potential pathogen growing in or on a host is said to cause an infection, but that infection can be transient because immune defenses, it kills the pathogen before any noticeable disease result. Pathogens may be either primary pathogen or the opportunistic pathogen. Primary pathogens are those disease-causing microbes possessing the means to breach the defenses of the healthy host. For example, Shigella flexneri, which is a causative agent of a bacillary dysentery, is a primary pathogen. When ingested, it can survive the natural barrier of the acidic pH of the stomach, then enter the intestine and begin to replicate, while opportunistic pathogen only cause the disease in the immunocompromised host. In AIDS patients whose immune system has been compromised, an opportunistic pathogen, which is Pneumocystis jirovecii, it causes a life-threatening infections. Some microbes may even enter into the latent state during infection, where the organism cannot be found by culture. For example, herpes virus can enter the peripheral nerves and remain dormant for years. Then suddenly, it emerges to cause cold sores. Now we'll see human diseases that is caused by bacteria. So the first one is diphtheria. So this diphtheria is caused by a bacterium called Corynebacterium diphtheriae. The disease is highly contagious and causes infection of the nose and throat. Some strains of the bacterium, it produce toxins, and it is these toxins that cause the most serious complication of diphtheria. The bacterium is spread from an infected person through coughing, sneezing, etc. And small droplets containing the infectious agent, it gets into the air. The sign and symptoms of the diphtheria, it develops after 2 to 5 days of infection, and the symptoms include fever and chills, sore throat, swollen neck gland, nasal discharge, etc. So once infected, the bacteria release the toxin and it spreads through the bloodstream and cause a thick grey coating in the nose, throat and tongue. In some cases, the toxins may damage the heart, brain and kidneys. So the treatment of the disease, it is carried out by injecting antitoxin, also known as antidiphtheritic serum, to neutralize the toxin which is released by the bacteria. Erythromycin antibiotic is also given to kill the bacteria and stop it from spreading. Now we'll come to tuberculosis. The disease tuberculosis, which is also known as TB, is caused by Mycobacterium tuberculosis. It is potentially an infectious disease that mainly affects the lungs. The disease is spread from one person to another through tiny droplets that is released into the air via cough and sneezes. Many strains of tuberculosis resist the drug that are used to treat the disease. Symptoms of tuberculosis include cough, weight loss, fatigue, fever, night sweat, chills, chest pain, shortness of breath, and loss of appetite. So there are two forms of TB. First one is the latent TB and the active TB. In latent TB, the bacteria, it remains in the body in an inactive state. They cause no symptoms and are not contagious, but they can become active. In active TB, the bacteria do cause symptoms and can be transmitted to others. For the treatment of TB, the antibiotics most commonly used include isoniazid, rifampin, pyrazinamide, and ethambutol. If a particular type of TB infection is resistant to regular antibiotic treatment, then such a condition is termed as multi-drug resistant TB. For this, a combination of different medication, it must be taken for 18 to 24 months. Next is anthrax. So anthrax is a serious disease caused by a spore-forming bacterium known as Bacillus anthracis. The disease mainly affects livestock such as pigs, cattle, horses, and goats. The disease is spread to humans from the infected animals through direct or indirect contact. So there are three common routes of anthrax infection showing different signs and symptoms. When the disease is caused by contact with the spores through a cut or scratch in the skin, it is known as cutaneous anthrax, with the symptoms of fever, chills, and swollen limb glands close to the area of the sore. Then by inhaling these spores, it is termed as pulmonary anthrax, which shows the symptoms of fever, chest discomfort, malaise, tiredness, and dry cough. Then by eating meat that contains a spore, it is termed as an intestinal anthrax. And this shows the symptoms of severe abdominal pain, nausea, vomiting, severe diarrhea, fever, and bleeding from the gastrointestinal tract. So this anthrax, it can be prevented with immunization and antibiotic treatment for those people who have been exposed to anthrax. Antibiotics such as ciprofloxacin or deoxycycline is administered orally to treat the disease. So now we'll come to tetanus. Tetanus, also called lockjaw, is a serious infection which is caused by tetanus toxin known as tetanospasmin, which is produced by Clostridium tetani. The organism is an anaerobic bacillus whose spores survive in soil and cause infection by contaminating wounds. The spores usually enter the body through a wound or breach in the skin. In the presence of anaerobic condition, the spores germinate and the bacteria produce very potent toxin, and it gets its way to the bloodstream and the lymphatic system, and finally it gets disseminated through the body. So this tetanus toxin, it causes the typical clinical manifestation of tetanus by interfering with the release of neurotransmitters and blocking inhibitors impulses. And this leads to unopposed muscle contraction and spasm. Seizures may occur and the nervous system may also be affected. For treatment, tetanus is a medical emergency requiring hospitalization and immediate treatment with human tetanus immunoglobulin, agents to control muscle spasm, aggressive wound care, antibiotics like penicillin or metronidazole, and a tetanus toxoid booster is given. Now we'll come to cholera. So this cholera is a serious bacterial infection caused by Vibrio cholerae. Cholera causes severe diarrhea and dehydration, and if left untreated, cholera can be fatal. Cholera is usually transmitted by water which is contaminated with human feces, but it can also be transmitted by ingesting contaminated food, especially raw or undercooked seafood and shellfish. The deadly effects of the disease are due to the production of the potent toxin by the bacteria known as the CTX. CTX interfere with the normal flow of the sodium and chloride when it binds to the intestinal walls. So when the bacteria attaches to the small intestinal walls, large amount of water is secreted by the body that leads to diarrhea and rapid loss of fluids and salts. Symptoms of the disease include profuse watery diarrhea, which is accompanied with vomiting and finally result in dehydration. The basic treatment for cholera is fluid replacement, including salts and mineral. Antibiotics like deoxycycline is recommended for adults, while azithromycin is recommended for children and pregnant women. Next, we'll see the human diseases caused by viruses. And the first viral disease is influenza. So influenza, which is commonly called as flu, is a highly contagious illness that can occur in children or adults of any age. It is spread easily from person to person by coughing, sneezing, or touching surfaces. The virus attacks the respiratory system, that is, nose, throat, and lungs. And the symptoms of the flu includes fever, chills and sweat, muscle aches, dry persistent cough, fatigue, nasal congestion, sore throat, etc. The most common complication of flu is pneumonia. So this pneumonia is a very serious infection of the lungs. The main treatment of influenza is plenty of rest and drinking plenty of fluids, but sometimes antivirals such as oseltamivir, which is commonly known as Tamiflu, and zanamivir, known as Relenza, may be prescribed under some circumstances. Next, we'll come to acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, known as AIDS. So this acquired immunodeficiency syndrome is a chronic, potentially life-threatening condition caused by the human immunodeficiency virus, which is known as HIV. HIV is a sexually transmitted infection. It can also be spread by contact with infected blood or from mother to child during pregnancy, or breastfeeding by the infected mother can also transmit HIV. So HIV is a virus that targets and alters the immune system and increasing the risk and impact of other infections and diseases. Once HIV enters the bloodstream, It takes over the CD4 plus cells, which play a vital role in immune response. The virus then inserts its own gene into the cell, which in turn produces more copies of the virus. Further, the amount of the virus in the blood increases and the number of healthy CD4 plus cells goes down. And the destruction of CD4 plus cells interfere with the body's ability to fight off infections, cancer, and other diseases. Symptoms of HIV infection: it appears 2 to 12 weeks after the exposure to the virus. Symptoms include diarrhea, fever, fatigue, headache, joint pains, night sweats, rash, swollen glands, weight loss, yeast infection, etc. In untreated cases, immune system weakens and they develop AIDS. So these AIDS is defined as having HIV and a specific type of infection. That is an opportunistic infection which is often associated with AIDS. This infection can be bacterial, fungal, viral, or parasitic. So people who have AIDS and receive no treatment are also more likely to develop cancer, especially the cancer of the immune system, that is lymphomas. Another cancer which is common to people with AIDS is Kaposi sarcoma, which is a type of cancer that causes bluish red nodules on the leg and then spreads to the lymph system. So women with AIDS are prone to developing cancer of the cervix. And most of the people with AIDS die from the diseases that AIDS make them more susceptible to. The virus, it occasionally infects the brain, causing dementia that gets worse over time. For treatment, HIV is usually treated with HAART, which is highly active antiretroviral therapy, which is a potent combination of anti-HIV medication. HAART will not cure HIV, but it can reduce the amount of virus in the blood, improve the immune system, and slow the progression of the disease. Next we'll come to rabies. So rabies is a zoonotic viral infectious disease. This infection is transmitted to human by the animals which is already suffering from it. The animals which are mainly reported as cause of rabies are dogs, raccoons, skunks, bats, and foxes. Rabies are commonly called hydrophobia. Hydrophobia is a disease which makes the dog sick. The virus is usually transmitted when people are bitten by an infected animal. The virus is transmitted in the saliva of an infected animal. From the point of entry, the rabies virus, it travels along the nerves to the spinal cord and then to the brain where it multiplies. From there, it travels along other nerves to the salivary gland and to the saliva. So once the rabies virus reaches the spinal cord and the brain, rabies is almost always fatal. However, the virus typically it takes 30 to 50 days to reach the brain. And the symptoms of rabies may begin with a fever, headache, and general feeling of illness, which is known as malaise. So most people become restless, confused, and uncontrollably excited. Their behavior may be bizarre. They may hallucinate and have insomnia. Saliva production greatly increases and the spasms of the muscle in the throat and the larynx occur because rabies affect the area in the brain that controls swallowing, speaking, and breathing. The spasm can be extremely painful. A slight breeze or an attempt to drink water can trigger the spasm. Thus, people with rabies cannot drink, and therefore the disease is sometimes referred to as hydrophobia, that is, fear of water. So as the disease spreads through the brain, the person becomes more confused and agitated. Eventually, coma and death results, and the cause of death can be blockage of airways, seizures, exhaustion, or widespread paralysis. So immediately after an animal bite, no test can determine whether the rabies virus has been transmitted. Thus, people who have been bitten may be given rabies immunoglobulin and vaccine by injection to prevent the rabies. Rabies immunoglobulin, which consists of antibodies to the virus, provide protection immediately but only for a short period of time. For rabies, no treatment can help after symptoms develop. At this point, the infection is virtually always fatal. Treatment involves relieving symptoms only. Now we'll come to human diseases which is caused by fungi. The first one is cutaneous candidiasis. Cutaneous candidiasis and other forms of candidiasis are infections caused by the yeast known as Candida albicans. Superficial infections of the skin and mucous membrane are most common types of Candida infection of the skin. Candidiasis, it may affect the skin. This includes the external surface skin and the skin of the vagina, the penis, and the mouth. Candidiasis may also infect the bloodstream or internal organs such as the liver or spleen. This can be a bothersome infection but are not life-threatening. Candidiasis is sometimes a serious threat to people with AIDS and some cancer patients who lack the immune resources to fight it. A Candida infection of the skin appears as a clearly defined patch of red, itchy skin, often leaking fluids. Scabs and pustules may be seen around the edge of the rash. For treatment of candidiasis, combination of antifungal drugs with the treatment methods of complementary medicine is recommended or required. Next is histoplasmosis. So histoplasmosis is also a fungal infection caused by a dimorphic fungi known as Histoplasma capsulatum. And the infection is caused by breathing in spores of a fungus which is often found in bird and bat droppings. The disease is transmitted when these spores become airborne. And the symptoms of the disease include fever, chills, headache, muscle ache, dry cough, chest discomfort, etc. So people who have underlying lung disease may develop a chronic form of histoplasmosis. And signs of chronic histoplasmosis may include weight loss and a cough that brings up blood. For treatment, an antifungal drug such as itraconazole is given. So depending on the severity of the infection and the person's immune status, the course of the treatment can range from 3 months to 1 year. So that was about microbial pathogenesis and diseases, and in the end, microbial diseases are with us and continue to be one of the contributors to global mortality and morbidity. So the emergence of the new pathogen, the increasing development of drug resistance, they have combined to create an increased demand for investigation into disease mechanism and the body's ability to combat the responsible organism.